The air in the kill house simulation deck was thick enough to drink, a stagnant cocktail of recycled oxygen, the bitter tang of ozone from the server racks, and the faint coppery scent of human sweat. It was a place built to forge warriors, but it felt more like a tomb where confidence went to die. The walls were a flat, non-reflective gray, designed to absorb light and hope in equal measure, and the only sound was the incessant low-frequency hum of the cooling fans, a mechanical mantra that vibrated deep in the bones. For the dozen recruits standing in a loose, terrified cluster, this sound was the metronome counting down the seconds of their inadequacy. They were young, their faces a mixture of adolescent fuzz and profound fear, their new digital camo uniforms hanging stiffly on frames that had not yet filled out with the muscle and misery of a long career. At the center of this universe of fear, holding court like a minor god in his own grim pantheon, was Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Hartman. He was a man built of concrete and fury, with a barrel chest that strained the fabric of his perfectly starched fatigues and a neck as thick as a utility pole. His voice was not so much a sound as it was a geological event, a rockslide of gravel and condescension that echoed off the dull gray walls and hammered itself into the skulls of his charges. He paced before them, his boots striking the composite floor with the percussive finality of a gavel. He was the law here, and the law was loud. Hartman's worldview was a simple, brutalist architecture constructed from the bedrock of observable strength. In his mind, the world was divided into hammers and nails, predators and prey, voices that commanded and whispers that obeyed. He had spent 2 decades carving his place into the hammer category, building an edifice of self-regard on a foundation of bellowed orders and the trembling silence of subordinates. He saw respect not as something earned through quiet competence, but as a territory to be conquered and occupied, its borders patrolled by intimidation and its flag flown with theatrical displays of dominance. To be quiet was to be weak. To be still was to be invisible. To be invisible was to be irrelevant, a nail waiting for the righteous impact of his hammer. He scanned the faces of the recruits, seeing only a sea of unhammered nails and a familiar, satisfying warmth spread through his chest. This was his stage. This was his kingdom. "You maggots think you can shoot," he boomed, the sound cracking like a whip in the enclosed space. He did not wait for an answer. The question was not an inquiry. It was an indictment. "You couldn't hit water if you fell out of a boat. You are a collection of thumbs and bad ideas, and you are wasting my taxpayer dollars in this multi-million-dollar facility with your pathetic, trembling attempts at being soldiers." His words were a physical force, and the recruits flinched as if struck. One of them, a lanky kid from Ohio whose name Hartman neither knew nor cared to know, swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing float. Hartman's eyes, small and sharp like chips of flint, locked onto the boy. "Something you want to say, Private?" "No, Gunnery Sergeant," the boy squeaked, his voice cracking. A cruel smile played on Hartman's lips. It was the smile of a man who had confirmed his own power. His sycophant, a weaselly corporal named Riggs, who orbited him like a pilot fish, snickered on cue. The sound was thin and oily. The performance was proceeding as planned. The hierarchy was being reinforced. This, to Hartman, was the very essence of leadership, the clear and public demonstration of who was in charge. It was about breaking them down, yes, but more importantly, it was about building himself up in their eyes, ensuring they understood the vast, unbridgeable chasm between his strength and their weakness. It was then, in the midst of his triumphant survey of the cowed audience, that his gaze drifted to a corner of the simulation deck. And there, he saw an anomaly, a disruption in the carefully orchestrated physics of his world. In the far corner, near a maintenance panel that was humming with a slightly discordant frequency, was a figure, a woman. She was small-framed, almost lost in the worn gray fatigues she wore. The uniform bore no rank, no insignia, no name tape, nothing. It was as anonymous as a shroud. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot at the nape of her neck. She was kneeling, her focus entirely consumed by a task. A thick braided data optic cable, A vital artery for the entire simulation system lay open on a static-free mat before her. With the delicate, unnervingly precise movements of a surgeon, she was cleaning one of the filament connectors with a small, specialized tool and a microfiber cloth. She was an island of profound stillness in his ocean of restless energy. The shock waves of his voice, which had sent tremors through the recruits, seemed to break upon her silence and dissipate into nothing. She did not look up. She did not flinch. She did not seem to be breathing. Her presence was a pocket of vacuum in the high-pressure system he had so carefully cultivated. She was not a part of his equation. She was an unknown variable, and Hartman's simple arithmetic of power had no room for such things. He watched her for a full 10 seconds, the silence stretching uncomfortably. The recruits, sensing a shift in the gunnery sergeant's attention, dared to follow his gaze. They saw the quiet woman, the focused intensity of her work, and then looked back at Hartman, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. A new drama was about to unfold. Hartman's internal calculus began to spin. Who was she? A civilian tech? A low-level contractor? Her plainness, her utter lack of military bearing, her silence, it all registered in his mind as a single, damning word: weakness. But it was a weakness tinged with something else he could not abide: disrespect. Her focused indifference to his performance was an implicit rejection of his authority. It was a silent, insolent challenge to the very foundation of his kingdom. She was a nail that had failed to present itself for hammering. "Well, well," Hartman's voice sliced through the hum, lower now, more predatory. "What do we have here?" He began to walk toward her, his heavy boots thudding on the floor. It was a deliberate theatrical approach, designed to draw every eye in the room to the confrontation he was about to initiate. Corporal Riggs scurried behind him, a smirk already fixed on his face, ready to echo his master's contempt. The recruits held their breath. He stopped directly behind her, looming over her small, kneeling form. He was a mountain of muscle and indignation, casting a shadow over her quiet work. She did not acknowledge him. She continued her delicate, methodical cleaning of the filament, her hands moving with an economy that was almost hypnotic. He waited for her to look up, to show fear, to recognize the predator that now stood over her. She did nothing. The silence stretched, and with each passing second, Hartman's internal pressure mounted. His ego, that carefully constructed edifice of bluster and command, was being threatened not by a counterattack, but by a void. Her calm was a mirror, and in it his performative rage looked foolish. "Lost, little bird?" he finally said, the condescension dripping from every syllable. "The library is 2 buildings over. This is where the real soldiers play. You might break a nail." Riggs let out his practiced snicker. A few of the recruits, caught in the powerful social gravity of the sergeant, shuffled their feet and offered weak, nervous smiles. They knew who held the power here. Siding with the mountain against the molehill was simple survival. Without looking up, the woman spoke. Her voice was shockingly quiet, a flat, emotionless monotone that seemed to absorb the room's tension rather than reflect it. The system was throwing a latency error, a 5-millisecond delay in the haptic feedback loop. I am correcting it. The technical jargon was like a foreign language to Hartman. He understood concepts like point and shoot and overwhelming firepower. Milliseconds and haptic loops were the arcane babble of the weak, the people who fixed things while men like him broke things. He saw her explanation not as a statement of fact, but as an evasion, an attempt to hide behind complex words. It was a tactic of the intellectually frail. "A latency error," he mocked, his voice rising back to its familiar booming register. He gestured dismissively at the complex machinery around them. "I'll tell you what the error is. The error is a generation of soft-bodied, weak-minded children who think wars are won by fiddling with wires. The gear is fine. The problem," he jabbed a thick finger toward the terrified recruits, "is a lack of guts, a lack of aggression. That's the error I'm here to fix." She finally paused her work. Slowly, she placed the cleaning tool on the mat. Then, with a fluid, unhurried motion, she rose to her feet. She was shorter than him by a full head, and her frame was lean, almost slight. But as she turned to face him, There was something in her stillness that gave her a strange, unshakable gravity. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out gray, and they held his gaze without a flicker of fear or deference. They were the eyes of a person looking at a problem to be solved, not a threat to be feared. The skin around her left eye was puckered with a faint, silvery network of old scars, the kind left by shrapnel. "The error is in the tertiary server's optical bridge," she stated, her voice still a quiet, level monotone. "It's causing a fractional delay. In a real-world scenario, that delay is the difference between a kill and a trade, or just a miss. It needs to be corrected." Her complete lack of emotional reaction was infuriating. It was like shouting at a stone wall. He was used to fear, to anger, to submission. He was not used to this placid, analytical calm. It was the ultimate form of disrespect. She was not even acknowledging the game he was playing, let alone her role as the intended victim. He felt his face flush with heat. The brittle shell of his authority was beginning to show hairline fractures. He needed to escalate. He needed to reassert control in a way that was undeniable. He took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back slightly to meet his eyes. He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, a gesture of casual, proprietary dominance. "Listen here, sweetheart. I am the gunnery sergeant on this deck. I decide what's an error and what isn't. And right now, the only error I see is you, a glorified repair tech, interrupting my training exercise with your technobabble." He squeezed her shoulder, expecting her to flinch, to yield. She did not. Her body remained utterly still, absorbing the pressure without reaction. It was like pressing his thumb into solid oak. Her pale gray eyes remained locked on his, and for the first time, he saw something shift in their depths. It wasn't fear. It was a flicker of weariness. The look of someone who had seen this exact brand of foolish peacocking arrogance 1,000 times before, and was simply tired of it. "My work is not finished," she said, the words clipped and precise. That was it, the final spark on the dry tinder of his ego. He snatched his hand back as if burned. "You know what? Fine." He spun to face the room, his arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimous challenge. "You think the machine is broken? I'll prove it's not. I'll run the toughest simulation we've got, the Reaper's Gauntlet, unbeatable, designed to break even seasoned operators. If I can run it, the machine is fine, and you can pack up your little toolkit and go back to the IT cave you crawled out of. If I fail, well, that's not going to happen." He expected her to back down, to protest. Instead, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Fine. A wave of confusion rippled through him. He had offered a challenge, and she had accepted, but not for herself. She had simply agreed to his terms. He had meant to intimidate her into silence, but instead, he had just committed himself to a public test of his own prowess. He had boxed himself in. A flicker of doubt, cold and unwelcome, entered his mind, but he crushed it immediately. He was Gunnery Sergeant Hartman. He did not fail. "Riggs," he barked. "Set it up. Reaper's Gauntlet, max difficulty." Riggs scurried to the control panel, his fingers flying across the touchscreen. The lights in the simulation room dimmed, and the main screen flickered to life, displaying a complex urban environment. Red threat indicators began to pop up in windows, on rooftops, in alleyways. The challenge was set. Hartman cracked his knuckles, a theatrical gesture for the benefit of the recruits. He grabbed a simulation rifle from the rack, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. He was back on solid ground. This was his world, the world of action. He stepped into the shooting box, ready to demonstrate the superiority of guts over wires. But before he could begin, the woman's quiet voice cut through the air once more. "You will fail," she said. It was not a prediction, it was a statement of fact. "The latency will cause a cumulative targeting drift. You'll be off by 3 centimeters at 20 meters by the 10th shot. You will miss the kill box on the high-value target." Hartman's jaw tightened. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it stole his breath. He turned to glare at her, his eyes promising a world of pain once his demonstration was complete. "Watch and learn, techie," he snarled. And then he began. For a moment, it was magnificent. Hartman was a skilled marksman, a product of years of training. He moved with a brutal efficiency, acquiring targets and firing. The simulation rifle barked, and the first few threat indicators on the screen vanished. The recruits watched, impressed. But then, just as the woman had said, a subtle drift began. A shot that should have been a clean hit registered as a peripheral graze. He compensated, his movements growing more frantic. The targets were appearing faster now, their patterns more erratic. He missed a shot. Then another. He was sweating, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The calm, controlled warrior was gone, replaced by a man furiously trying to keep up. The final target, the high-value one, appeared in a third-story window. He aimed, fired, and the simulated bullet struck the brickwork 3 centimeters to the left. A loud, jarring buzzer sounded. The screen flashed red with 2 words. Mission failed. A profound, stunned silence descended upon the room. It was heavier, more complete than any silence that had come before. Hartman stood frozen in the box, his rifle held loosely at his side. His face, projected in stark relief by the red glow of the failure screen, was a mask of disbelief. His world, with its simple rules and clear hierarchies, had just been shattered. He had been beaten not by a person, but by a prediction, by math. The hammer had swung and missed the nail completely. The woman watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to the recruits. "This is why we check the equipment," she said, her voice still a quiet, instructional monotone. She then walked past the frozen gunnery sergeant and into the shooting box. She picked up the rifle he had just used. Hartman found his voice, a strangled, desperate rasp. "What do you think you're doing?" "My job," she said, without looking at him. "Verifying the fault." Her preparation was a thing of quiet, terrifying beauty. It was not a ritual of bravado, but of pure function. She did not pump the weapon or strike a pose. She checked the rifle's balance, shifting her weight from one foot to the other until she was perfectly centered. She brought the stock to her shoulder in a single, fluid motion. Her eyes, which had seemed so pale and distant, narrowed with an intensity that was startling, becoming chips of focused ice. She took a single, slow breath, and the world seemed to slow down with her. Hartman and his audience saw a technician picking up a tool. What they were actually witnessing was a master picking up their instrument. "Riggs," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Reset the simulation. Same parameters." Riggs, his face a mess of confusion, fumbled with the controls. The screen flickered back to the urban landscape. The red threat indicators blossomed once more. She did not wait for a starting signal. She simply began. What happened next would be etched into the memory of every person in that room, a story they would tell for the rest of their careers. It was not a display of marksmanship. It was a violation of the laws of physics. Ping. A target in a far window vanished. Ping. A hostile on a rooftop dropped. Ping, ping, ping. 2 targets in an alleyway, gone before they could even raise their weapons. Her movements were impossibly economical. She didn't seem to aim. The rifle simply arrived at the correct position in space and time. She accounted for the 3-centimeter latency with an instinct that defied logic, adjusting her aim fractionally for each shot. She was not fighting the simulation, she was dancing with it, her mind working light years ahead of the code. The rifle was not a tool in her hands, it was an extension of her will. The entire simulation, the dreaded Reaper's Gauntlet, designed to be unbeatable, was cleared. 9 seconds. A perfect score. The screen flashed green. Mission complete. Perfect run. A score of 10,000 out of 10,000 glowed on the monitor, a number the system's designers had considered a theoretical maximum, not an achievable result. The silence that followed was different. It was not stunned. It was sacred. The recruits stared, their mouths agape, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Corporal Riggs stood by the console, his hands trembling slightly. Gunnery Sergeant Hartman looked as though he had been turned to stone. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying understanding. He had not just been proven wrong, he had been rendered utterly, comprehensively irrelevant. His entire identity, built on a foundation of physical prowess and loud confidence, had been obliterated by 9 seconds of impossible, silent perfection. The woman lowered the rifle and placed it carefully back on the rack. She showed no sign of triumph, no hint of satisfaction. Her face was as calm and unreadable as it had been when she was cleaning the cable. She turned, her pale gray eyes sweeping over the frozen onlookers, and then she walked back to her corner, knelt down, and picked up her microfiber cloth, resuming her task as if nothing had happened. It was at that precise moment that the main door to the simulation deck slid open with a soft hiss. A woman entered, her presence instantly commanding the attention of the entire room. She was a full-bird colonel, the silver eagles on her collar gleaming in the dim light. She was tall and carried herself with an air of calm, unshakable authority that made Hartman's bluster seem like the tantrum of a child. By her side, holding her hand, was a little girl of about 6, her eyes wide with curiosity. The colonel's gaze swept the room, taking in the scene with a quick analytical glance. The awe-struck recruits, the shell-shocked gunnery sergeant, and the quiet woman in the corner meticulously finishing her work. A flicker of understanding, mixed with a profound sense of weary resignation, crossed her face. She had seen this play before. "Gunnery Sergeant Hartman," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a scalpel, cold and precise. Every recruit in the room snapped to attention. Hartman, jolted from his stupor, managed a clumsy, reflexive straightening of his spine. "Colonel Rostova," he stammered. Colonel Rostova walked slowly toward the center of the room, her daughter staying close to her side. She stopped and looked at Hartman, her eyes holding no anger, only a deep clinical disappointment. "Report," she commanded. Hartman opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he say? That he had tried to humiliate a civilian technician and had instead been so thoroughly dismantled that he questioned his own reality? That his entire worldview had been proven to be a fragile, arrogant lie? He just stood there, a broken statue of a man. Rostova did not press him. She turned her attention to the recruits. "Let me tell you all a story," she said, her voice now taking on a professorial tone. "There is a difference between the performance of strength and the reality of it. One is loud, theatrical, and demands an audience. It is a brittle shell, easily shattered. The other is quiet. It is methodical. It has no need for validation, for its results are its only testament." She then turned and gestured toward the corner, where the woman was now packing her small toolkit. "You all owe your lives and the lives of every soldier on this base to that techie." The recruits stared, confused. Rostova's gaze settled on the woman. "Most of you will never know her name. Her file is a collection of black ink and redactions. She does not officially exist." She then looked back at Hartman, her eyes narrowing. "But you, gunnery sergeant, as a senior non-commissioned officer, should have recognized the signs. You should have felt it in the air. You were in the presence of a master, and you were too blinded by your own ego to see it." She took a step closer to the woman, who had now risen and was preparing to leave. "Chief Warrant Officer 5 Anya Petrova," Rostova said, her voice ringing with a formal clarity that stunned the room into a new level of silence. The rank was one of legend, a near-mythical position held by the most elite technical and tactical specialists in the entire military. "Though I believe the few who survived working with you had another name for you." Anya Petrova met the colonel's gaze. For the first time, a flicker of something, a shared history, a deep and unspoken understanding passed between them. "They called you Kikimora," Rostova continued, her voice now low, filled with a profound reverence. "The wraith, the ghost in the machine, the one they sent when things were well and truly broken. I was a lieutenant in Kandahar when your name was first whispered on the command net. A whole communications grid for an entire sector had gone down. We were blind, deaf, and facing a massive enemy offensive. We were 24 hours from being completely overrun." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Then you arrived. No entourage, no announcement, just a single figure with a toolkit. You went into the server hub, a place where 3 separate teams had already failed, and you stayed there for 72 hours straight. We could hear the firefight raging outside your door. When you came out, you looked like you had been to hell and back, but the grid was up. Every satellite link, every drone feed, every encrypted channel was crystal clear. You didn't just fix it. You made it better. You saved over 800 lives that week." Rostova took another step forward, standing directly before Anya. She gently touched the faint silvery scars by Anya's eye. A gift from that particular mission, I believe. Then, she glanced at the faded tattoo barely visible on Anya's wrist as she lifted her toolkit. It was a small cryptic symbol, the insignia of a special operations unit so secret its existence was a classified rumor. Colonel Eva Rostova, commander of the entire training facility, a woman who commanded the respect of generals, then did something that no one in the room had ever seen. She brought her heels together with an audible click. She raised her hand in a salute so crisp, so perfect, it seemed to cut the air. It was not the casual salute between officers. It was the ultimate formal gesture of respect, given from a high-ranking commander to a living legend. "Ma'am," Rostova said, her voice thick with genuine reverence, "it is an honor to have you on my base." Anya Petrova simply gave a short, sharp nod of acknowledgement. She hefted her toolkit. "The latency is fixed," she said, her voice the same quiet, flat monotone. "Recalibrate the sensors before running live-fire exercises." And with that, she turned and walked out of the simulation deck, her footsteps making no sound. She disappeared as quietly as she had appeared, leaving behind a legacy and a room full of shattered assumptions. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Colonel Rostova turned her cold gaze back to Hartman. He was no longer a mountain of a man. He was a pile of rubble. His face was ashen, his body trembling. The weight of his foolishness, of his catastrophic misjudgment, had crushed him. He had not just insulted a technician, he had shown the highest form of disrespect to a decorated hero, a phantom of the special operations world whose story was the stuff of campfire legend. "Get out of my sight, gunnery sergeant," Rostova said, the words of final, quiet dismissal. "Your career as an instructor is over. Report to my office at 800 tomorrow. We will discuss your future, if you have one." Hartman did not speak. He stumbled out of the room like a man in a trance, his world completely unmade. The recruits watched him go, their faces a mixture of pity and a new, sharp understanding. They had just received the most important lesson of their young careers, and it had nothing to do with marksmanship. They looked at the empty space where Anya Petrova had stood, and their understanding of strength, of leadership, of respect had been permanently and irrevocably rewired. Later that afternoon, the sun was casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the base. Colonel Rostova was walking with her daughter, their day finally done. As they passed a row of manicured hedges, they saw him. Marcus Hartman was sitting on a lone bench, his large frame hunched over, his head buried in his hands. His broad shoulders were shaking with ragged, silent sobs. He was a broken man, weeping in the fading light. The little girl stopped, her small hand tightening in her mother's. She pointed a tiny finger at the weeping soldier. "Mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with innocent confusion. "Why is she crying?" Rostova stopped and looked at the man who had only hours before been a monument to his own arrogance. She saw not a gunnery sergeant, but a lesson, a painful, necessary lesson. She knelt down to be at eye level with her daughter. "He's crying, my love," she said softly, "because he learned a very hard lesson today. He learned that the loudest person in the room is not always the strongest. And sometimes, by the time you realize who the truly strong person is, it's too late." The story of what happened in the kill house spread like wildfire, as such stories always do. It became a piece of institutional folklore, a cautionary tale told in whispers in mess halls and barracks. It was a story about the ghost who perfect scored the Reaper's gauntlet and humbled a gunnery sergeant with 9 seconds of silence. For the recruits who were there, it became a foundational myth, the bedrock of their understanding of what a true warrior looked like. It wasn't the swagger or the volume, it was the quiet, unnerving competence. Years passed. Marcus Hartman was never the same. He was reassigned to a logistics depot, a place where his booming voice was useless against the drone of forklifts and the rustle of paperwork. But the humiliation did not destroy him. It remade him. He became quiet, thoughtful. He started to listen. Eventually, he earned a second chance, a teaching position at a basic training facility. He was a different kind of instructor now. He never raised his voice. He taught his recruits about humility, about listening, about the quiet professionals who truly held the world together. He used his own story, the tale of his own spectacular failure, as his most powerful teaching tool. He taught them to look for the still, quiet person in the corner because that was often where true strength resided. Anya Petrova, the woman they called Kikimora, was gone. She had moved on to the next broken system, the next impossible problem. Her legend grew, but she remained indifferent to it. She had no interest in fame or recognition. Her work was its own reward. She was a ghost in the machine, a silent guardian, forever fixing the vital, unseen things that allowed the loud, visible world to function. She was the foundation that no one ever saw, but upon which everything was built. There exists a fundamental truth in the architecture of our world, a truth that we are often too distracted to see. We are drawn to the spectacle, to the noise, to the grand performance of power. We mistake volume for authority and confidence for competence. We build our hierarchies based on the visible, on the theatrical displays of dominance that play out in boardrooms, on battlefields, and in the digital arenas of our modern lives. We look at the person who pounds the table and assume they hold the strongest hand. We listen to the loudest voice and believe it speaks the most important truth. We are, by our very nature, captivated by the surface of things, by the shimmering, turbulent waters that hide the silent, powerful currents below. But the world is not held together by the loud. It is not maintained by the performative. The true strength, the essential competence that underpins all of our complex systems, is almost always quiet. It is the programmer who finds the single flawed line of code that prevents a catastrophic failure. It is the engineer who sees the hairline fracture in the bridge before it collapses. It is the doctor who notices the subtle, almost imperceptible symptom that leads to a life-saving diagnosis. These are the masters, the quiet professionals who have no need for an audience. Their skill is not a performance, it is a fact, as solid and unyielding as granite. Their reward is not applause, but the simple, profound satisfaction of a problem solved, a system restored, a disaster averted. Arrogance is a fortress built on sand. It requires constant, frantic maintenance. It must be reinforced daily with the submission of others, with the sound of its own voice, echoing in a silent room, with the performance of its own superiority. It is a fragile, hollow thing, terrified of the one thing that can expose it, the quiet, irrefutable evidence of true mastery. Humility, in contrast, is not weakness. It is the silent, confident understanding of one's own capabilities. It has no need to boast, for its work speaks for itself. The true master does not need to tell you they are a master. They will simply do what others deem impossible, and they will do it with an economy and a grace that is, in itself, the only statement that ever needs to be made. We must learn to see past the noise, to listen to the silence, for it is in that silence that the real work is done. It is in that stillness that true strength resides. If you believe that true respect is earned through quiet action, not loud proclamation, then you have understood the most important lesson of all. The world turns not on the shouts of the arrogant, but on the steady, silent hands of the competent.